This week's episode is about moving from one country to another to start school. Heading off to university is a significant milestone in one's life, and even more so if it also means traveling abroad to a whole new country on your own. For international students who started university during COVID, the experience has been a little different. But as vaccines are doled out and health situations look better, it's hopeful that this year's international students will be able to go to school in the fall. We thought we'd speak with someone who's been an international student himself while at graduate school, and also very familiar with the needs and situations of international students on a major university campus. Professor Joseph Wong is Vice President International, University of Toronto, where he's also the Roz Ralph Halbert Professor of Innovation at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Professor of Political Science at the Faculty of Arts and Science. He has held the Canada Research Chair in Health, Democracy, Development for 2 terms from 2006. I guess the 2 terms are 2006 and 2016. He's obviously a very bright guy. He's the author of many academic articles and several books, including Healthy Democracies, Welfare Politics in Taiwan and South Korea, and Betting on Biotech, Innovation and the Limits of Asia's Development State. Inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals in collaboration with the Mastercard Center for Inclusion Growth, Professor Wong founded the REACH Alliance, a model for student-led, faculty-mentored, multi-disciplinary research dedicated to investigating the pathways to success for innovative programs that are reaching the world's most marginalized populations. That is a very long and impressive bio.
Someone else must have provided it for you.
Welcome to our podcast, Breathe In.
Good to see a former student too.
Down from the original.
Yeah, you clearly got that from someone else. Someone from my office, probably.
So I remember, just so people know, when I did my graduate program at U of T, you were actually a pretty new professor, and that's how I know you. And I remember you, I think we had a conference at the Munk Center. It was one of our first conferences, and we brought in a few different people. And I remember you telling a story about being in the States and doing your PhD in is it Madison, Wisconsin, and
Yep.
It just seemed like it was a really formative experience for you. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about it, as an international student and just as a graduate student.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely formative, in the sense that here I was in my early 20s, doing my PhD, and so the work itself obviously was something that I was not at all accustomed to. It was really 24/7, it felt like. And, if you intend on doing your PhD, you really have to be passionate about it because it becomes an occupation. And if not done well, you're an occupational hazard. So, but this is something, I really was passionate about. But studying in the U.S. was really an eye-opener for me, even though Canada and the U.S. are, by most measures, really similar. There are some things that are just still very fundamentally different. And it's not until you actually live in another place and, have friends who are American and engage in public discourse and, get a sense of what's important and what's less important in American society. It's not until you do that that you really discover some of the critical differences between where I grew up and where I was doing graduate school. I mean, I'll just give you an example. When people ask me, like, what's the biggest difference between the U.S. and Canada? I would say, a lot of the things that they're debating in the U.S. and they continue to debate. And, I was there during the late 1990s, sort of at the height of the culture wars. Things like a woman's right to choose, things like access to healthcare, things like gun control. These are issues that, as far as I'm concerned, in Canada, we kind of long ago dealt with, and we've kind of moved on. And yet, here is this society that's very similar to ours, in which this is the core issue, right? These are the core issues that's dividing the body politic and society there. So, Even in two places in two countries as similar as Canada and US, once you actually have that experience and you really engage and you kind of, you dig deep, you really discover those sorts of things. But when I think about international students, though, I often think about, on a personal level, I think about my father, who grew up in rural Malaysia. And he, in the 1960s, went to England to study. And I often think about how crazy that must have been. I flew on a plane from Toronto to Chicago, and then took a bus from Chicago to Madison, Wisconsin. My father was, took a boat, took a plane to make his way to the UK. Just think about Manchester in the 1960s and being a Chinese guy for whom English is not your first language, and so on. And so I think about international education and international students through that lens. And I have to say, I think I admire my dad so much, not only for his audacity and curiosity, but just the courage, right? Like, how scary must have that been? So when I meet international students now, I always ask them, like, so what were you thinking when the plane landed? What were you thinking as you went through that sliding door at Lester Pearson Airport and you were now in Toronto? Just to kind of capture, and a lot of them are like, it's a mixture of excitement, anxiety, fear of the unknown, and so on. So it's really, look, for me to go to the US didn't take all that much courage, but for others, I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I went to China after my undergrad, and I had taken 1 year of Chinese, and I thought I knew some Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
I landed on the ground. Nobody knows what I'm saying. I can't understand them. Everybody's
Right.
talking so
Where did
fast.
you fly into? What city?
Well, first, actually, I did a little summer thing of teaching English, and I was actually with a group of teachers.
Okay.
So, like, it was a little gradual. And then one of the other college students, she ended up going to Beijing. And so, fortunately, I got this scholarship. Like, I literally went back to Canada for 2 weeks packed and then flew to
Right.
Beijing.
Right.
And she met me at the airport. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have got to Peking University. At the time, it was
Yeah.
2004. So
Totally different than
the
now.
Olympics, Beijing was still very rural.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
there was rural space around Peking University. And the airport was just
It was the old airport.
Yeah, and so it was overwhelming. Like, for
Well,
the
the
first
first,
semester,
yeah, the first time I ever really did extensive studying, or just, when I was a student spending time overseas, was when I was an undergraduate. And in the summer between, I think, my second and third year, I went to China. This was in 1992.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
just 3 years after Tiananmen. And that was crazy. That was really crazy. In Beijing, I think there was maybe one ring road at the time. And if you just went on the main thoroughfare in Beijing, just north of Tiananmen Square, is Chang'an. And that was like, I rode my bicycle down that street. And you could ride, I don't know, 500 meters out, and then you're pretty much in the countryside. And now there are like 7, 8 ring roads in Beijing. It takes you like forever to get around the city. Shanghai at that time, Pudong didn't even exist. So that skyline that everyone associates with Shanghai, that was literally a farmer's field. And so when you were on the one side of the Bund looking over to what is now Pudong, it was just fields. The only skyline in Shanghai at that time was on the other side of the Bund, which was where all the colonial buildings were. So it was crazy. And like you, I was learning Chinese, and I'd listened, I'd heard it all growing up, and so on. I think my ability in Chinese wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't great. But in '92, no one spoke English.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to speak, if you wanted to just even have any interaction with anybody, you had to do it in Chinese. Yeah, absolutely. So it was an amazing time. I tell my students about it all the time, just try to excite them and get them interested in having that kind of experience.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's definitely worth it to be an international student.
For sure. And, when else are you going to be able to do it, right? As you graduate and move on and stuff. Yeah, I mean, you just don't have the time or the energy,
Yeah.
or maybe not even the curiosity anymore. It's really something I think you need to capture when you're younger.
Hmm. And I know a lot of your research is also international development, and you talked about being passionate doing your PhD. So what drew you to that area of research, and what kind of keeps you going?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, people have asked that a lot. I mean, one way of thinking about it is you write a doctoral thesis that will get you a job, and the academic market is just like any other market in the sense that you need to be attentive to what people want to know about and what kinds of expertise. But for me, I think I've always had an abiding concern around issues of equity and fairness and justice. And, I mean, there are colleagues of mine in philosophy and political theory, sociology, anthropology who approach it in different ways. But, I was always just concerned about things like growth and growth with equity and so on. And so I became very interested in the East Asian developmental states early on because these were places like Taiwan, Korea, Japan. These were
Hmm.
places that were growing at 10% a year. And yet at the same time, the distribution of income seemed to be pretty equitable by most measures, by every measure, actually, whether it be, economic measures or sociological categories and so on. And I really wanted to understand that. I was like, how does this happen, right? Because we expect that when you have rapid growth, you're going to see growing levels of inequality. And indeed, that is the case in most countries and societies around the world. And yet here were these East Asian developmental states that were doing something different. And I really wanted to understand that. So that's what got me in, thinking about things like social policy,
Hmm.
social safety nets. And so my doctoral thesis was actually on universal healthcare
Hmm.
in Taiwan and South Korea.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, at the time, no one really appreciated just how difficult it is to create a universal healthcare system, and particularly in these societies that were just starting to democratize, and that we're still economically developing and so on. And so I think that work not only captured what was going on in that part of the world, but it really informed how we think about Latin America, how we think about social policy and in developing economies in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So I mean, it was fun. It was interesting. It was something I believed in, and it made the work all the more rewarding.
Has that changed since, like, over time? Because I know as someone who studied China, there definitely were different ideas about development and, where would China go, where would Asia go in the 90s and early, 2000s. And
Yeah.
today, a lot of those guys are like, well, I kind of predicted things. I didn't quite predict things accurately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's interesting. I mean, China obviously stands out, right? Because it's just such an economic giant now. And when we go back to 1989, for instance, which is where a lot of the West, if you will, sort of first encountered China, and it happened to encounter China in the wake of a massive scale repression in Tiananmen Square, and this is what caught the attention of the world. And a lot of people then started pinning their hopes on not only a rapidly growing economy but also a democratizing polity. I think one of the things that we actually forget, and I think we need to remember, is that China actually only opened up to the world in the late 1970s.
Yeah,
And actually, in 1989, China was still a really poor country.
yeah.
All the things that we associate with, hypermodern China today was a pipe dream in 1989. It wasn't even until like 1992, 93 that the economic planners there really started trying to attract foreign investment and so on. So what we've seen in China is just pretty miraculous, right? And not only miraculous for growth, but how fast it's happened. Now, I mean, China's distinctive. It's really unique. I mean, there are sound economic policies, there are shrewd strategic trade policies. But I think one of the things that we also have to remember with China, and that's something that is new to many of us, is that it's just such a big country.
Yeah.
And so when you have 1.4 billion people, you can just sell within your own borders and still be a very globally successful company. We've never experienced that before. Japan in the 1980s, yeah, they were a rival to the West, but they still needed to sell to the West. They still needed to export and trade with the West. China right now is in a position to become very dominant just because it has such a large domestic consumer market as well. So I don't think people could have foreseen this, and obviously we didn't. And here we are.
Yeah. So back to international students.
Mm-hmm.
A lot has changed over the last year.
Yeah.
I know some of the students I work with, they just decide to stay wherever they are and not come
Mm-hmm.
back to Toronto. Some were kind of trapped in Toronto in their
Mm-hmm.
apartments, not able to go home.
Mm-hmm.
How has the university been dealing with that? What kind of things have you and the people you work with learned? How do you think this
Yeah.
has changed how we think of education?
I mean, it's yeah, no. I mean, it's totally crazy, right? I mean, everybody remembers where they were mid-March last year, and I remember talking to a colleague, another one of the vice presidents, and he was saying, "Yeah, looks like we may be closing the borders pretty soon." And I was like, "Oh, okay." This was like 4 days before it all happened, right? And I said, "Yeah, so we've currently got X thousands of students all around the world right now. We're going to have to think about how to get them back." And this is my portfolio. And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense." But, it just,
You knew?
what's
You
that?
to this portfolio at the time? Like, how long had you been doing that?
So I was at that time, I was the vice provost for international. So international learning, outbound mobility, all this stuff, like learning abroad, that was all part of my portfolio. And I just remember thinking like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense, but it just didn't really dawn on me. And then on Thursday was when I think it was a Thursday when the provincial government said we're locking down. And by Monday, like literally 4 days later, we had 6,500 courses go online over the course of the
Wow.
weekend. So it was just crazy. And then, we had literally thousands of students all around the world, and we had to somehow get them back. We
Yeah.
had thousands and thousands of students who were on campus who were trying to get home. And I think one of the things that I really took from that experience was that, I can say to you like, well, thousands of students, but in the end, there are thousands of individuals. There are thousands of individuals who have individual needs, individual worries, individual circumstances, and so forth. And so our offices and the staff were just working round the clock because it wasn't just like, okay, all students do this and you'll be fine. It's like each student you had to address their very specific concerns. And so we were watching every day, just like the number of students coming back. We've still got 1,200 students out. Now we have 800 students out and so on. So there was really, it was a quick pivot to move an institution, but then you have individuals that you need to take care of. So I think one of the things that for me is a real lasting lesson of the whole experience was just a kind of like a mindset of kindness. People are freaking out, right? Like it's like I'm in Myanmar. What do I do? Or my family is in India. How do I get home? Or I'm currently studying abroad in like rural Japan. What do I do? And you could be very bureaucratic about it, and you can just say, well, here's the email, and here's the frequently asked, the FAQ page. Go to or you can be kind about it. And I think that was something we all took from this, was just that we were really needing to be human at a time when we needed to be, like machine-like and bureaucratic. So that's one thing. And then we had the summer, right, to kind of figure things out, as it were. but no one really knew like how long this was going to last. So, through the summer, we're kind of like, well, maybe we'll do like hybrid learning, or maybe we'll do some mix of in-person and online. And in fact, when I started teaching in the fall of 2020, I taught one seminar. It was a mix, right? So we had about 10 students beaming in through Zoom, and then about 10 students in person, and trying to manage that as well, and so on. So there was just a lot of constant adaptation, constant learning, and so on. And so that was something that we've just had to deal with. I mean, now when we talk about scenario planning, right? I mean, you have to have like 7 scenarios because you just don't know what's going to happen. And as we look now to the fall, like, we have one scenario that's everyone is back on campus and everything is just hunky-dory, just like it was before. But we also have about 6 other scenarios just in case that isn't the case or whatever. So I think that's one of the things that just come out is just the amazing adaptability of a large institution like a university. Right? I mean, like 90,000 students and 15,000 staff and faculty and so on. It's like, how do you move that on a dime? We've been able to manage it, I think, pretty well so far.
So do you think this is going to change the way the university approaches education? Because I think that for me, doing this as a private individual, this has been like, there's been a lot of opportunities. Like my previous students, now they live in some of them in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Now I can help them. Whereas when we were focusing on like in person, I wouldn't have been able to have such a large network, or even I've been able to connect more with the University of Alberta where I did my undergrad,
right,
as well as U of T. I didn't have that opportunity. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there are one thing we know is that ideally students would like to be in person, and that we want to have as many in-person opportunities as possible. But we also know that there are things that we can do and ways that we can reach students using online platforms like this that we were completely unaware of before. And that can really, dynamize a classroom. One of the things that we've launched this year are what we're calling global classrooms. And basically, this is just where we connect, using this technology, our classes here at U of T with classes at institutions in other parts of the world. So I did one with Tec de Monterrey in Mexico. And I just did it as a pilot because I have a friend there. I wanted to do it with Taiwan too, but the time difference was a little bit more challenging. But, with Mexico, it was pretty easy. And we just built into our courses, right? He was teaching a course, I was teaching a course, separate courses, but we built in a 4-week module on COVID and inequality. And we had his students from Mexico and my students from U of T collaborating together and working together on projects of shared interest and so on. Like that would have been impossible. We wouldn't have even thought of that because we would have said, well, we need to get on a plane. We need to, we need to pollute the world even more. We need to get on a plane. We need to go somewhere for 3 days and, to actually get this done. It's like, no, you don't. And these students then had an opportunity to really learn about COVID and its impact in Mexico, which of course is a really interesting case. They had a chance to learn about indigenous issues and some of the challenges that the government there is facing. They got a chance to learn about inequality and informality and so forth by talking to their peers in Mexico. Like that's unbelievable. And so, I think that moving forward, just this coming year, this term coming this fall, my buddy in Mexico at Tec de Monterrey and I are going to do it again. We're like, why not, right? This is just such an important part of the learning experience. So I think your instinct is right. I think that there are lots of things we've learned. There are lots of ways we can use platforms like this to do things that would have been completely inconceivable in the past. There's going to be a complete, people still want to be together. People still want to be, interacting. There still has to be that human element. I have research teams and teams of RAs that I've never even met in person before, and, it's okay because I know it's just temporary. I couldn't imagine if that would be permanent. So, I think there are things we've learned. I think there are things that I definitely know there are things we've learned, but I think that the things that we can make permanent in how we offer both the sort of curricular and co-curricular experiences.
Yeah, I mean,
This is so normal now, right? You can talk to anyone around the world. Like before, it would have been so weird and and exciting and complicated and technologically sophisticated, and we'd have to spend days getting the technology ready. And now it's just send a Zoom invite, and everyone can get on, and you can connect with young people or your peers from around the world in an instant. So it's I think that there's a lot of good things that have come out of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was using this technology before, like 10 years ago, because my first student was in Japan.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was on Skype.
Okay, yeah.
And then actually I was using Zoom before this. So I had a pretty okay transition. I just closed everything down, moved home. I thought this is a 2-year thing.
Right.
I was the opposite of you. I was like Spanish flu. This is the new Spanish flu.
This is it.
I'm gonna look at that timeline because I like history. But I think the two takeaways for me, and I think you're echoing them, is the kindness piece.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I do is I sort of support high school, university students on a more one-on-one personal level, which as universities get bigger, it's great. But even compared to when I was an undergrad, maybe you were an undergrad, the time you get sort of with your professors or TA is less. And I feel like this kind of COVID thing brought that back a little bit.
Yeah. And, absolutely.
And I love that collaborative thing. I mean, I was teaching high school in China for one semester during this.
Right.
Canadian,
wow, really?
Grade 11 Canadian Ontario curriculum.
Using these online platforms. Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with those students. So if they come to Canada one day, they'll know a Canadian.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we that's great. I mean, we've continued, so in terms of our international partnership building and so on, and research collaboration and professor to professor collaboration, we used to have to get on a plane and go to the other side of the world and, have a symposium and then try to do some writing and work together and so on. I mean, ideally, again, there will be an element of that, but, over the past 12 months, and since I've been vice president international, our partnership building activities have gone up. And we're closing more deals than ever before, just because now, before it used to, you make your one trip to Australia each year and you kind of load everything into a 2-day visit. Now we can Zoom, every 4 weeks and get things moving at a pace that was just completely impossible before. So I think there are lots of things that are going to stay.
Yeah. I think it's good for maintaining relationships. Like you can go to a conference, you can meet a bunch of people, but back in the day when you just emailed them back and forth, I mean, you can't. So it's really valuable.
I do hope the kindness piece though stays, right? And that I'm we're all so tired and we're all at our wits' end, and our students are, our faculty are, our staff who are just incredible, who are on the front line. Everyone's exhausted. And I just hope that we're able to maintain that moving forward.
Yeah, I think there was a whole piece, we're all in this together. I mean, it kind of it's not, people were affected by COVID in different ways, but there were some similarities.
Yeah, so well, we were all affected, probably in different ways, but we were all affected, that's for sure. Yeah.
So what having gone through, all these different experiences, yourself as an international student, a professor, now in this portfolio, going through COVID, and we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let's be honest.
Right.
So, what advice would you have for this new cohort of incoming students? You got some notes there?
No, I was just looking down. I was just thinking. Advice. I think one of the things is really embrace every opportunity you get. I mean, especially at a university like Toronto, and you've been there, you know what it's like. I mean, it is one of the most massive places, and scale brings with it both advantages and disadvantages. And what you just hope is that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages.
Mhm.
One of the challenges anywhere, but especially at a large institution like U of T, is how do you find these opportunities? How do you develop co-curricular opportunities? How do you satisfy your academic and non-academic curiosities and so on? So that's a challenge. But I also want to, I think it's counterbalanced, and the net effect is a net positive effect, is that there are just so many opportunities at a place like the University of Toronto, and universities more generally, or colleges more generally. You just have to find them. And so one of the things that I always say to new students is that you could go through university and just be a number. And
Right.
it's not just at U of T, it can be anywhere.
Yeah.
You could just be a number. Or you could really actively seek out opportunities. And people want you to seek out these opportunities. The university wants you to be, professors don't like sitting in their offices with nobody coming to see them during office hours. Like,
Yes, please repeat this. We've
yeah.
had this on the podcast a few times.
Oh,
Go
really?
ask the professors
Yeah.
questions.
I mean, we
They are
have these
not
office hours.
scary.
Yeah,
You're
we
not
have these
scary.
office hours, and no one ever comes. And it's just like, well, why do I have these office hours? I mean, I want people to come and visit, and I want them to, to ask questions and to engage on the material. And so, I mean, this is why we put the time aside to do that. And so, take those opportunities. Certainly be talking to your TAs and so on. And then just, there's just so many opportunities, whether they're co-curricular, Hart House or various clubs and things like that, or research opportunities, right? And again, they're not gonna come flying into your lap, right? You've got to go and find them. So I would say that that's probably, irrespective of whether we're more online or less online, it's just really about being kind of entrepreneurial when you're out there.
Mhm.
I guess the other thing I would say, and this may sound a little counterintuitive from a professor, and I guess you can quote me because this is being recorded, but have fun. Go into this with a mindset that you should have a good time. I always tell my students who care to listen, but I had a full scholarship to McGill when I started, and I lost it my first year.
You had too much fun.
I had too much fun, and I don't regret it at all. I sort of smartened up, and was able to, in the end, I think get a couple other smaller scholarships. But what a rude awakening to have something like that taken away because your grades were so bad. But
But look at you now.
yeah. Well, this is what I say to students. I said, like, you can kind of screw around and totally f things up in your first year, and you can still be all right. You can still end up all right. But students will say to me, but times are different now, and it's much more competitive, and so on. And I always say to them, it's like, it's not. It was pretty competitive back then. I knew people who went to Harvard and went to Stanford and went to Oxford and so on, and I just Rhodes Scholars, and I just wasn't one of them because I didn't work hard enough. I don't just say didn't work hard enough. I made different choices, and so I would say to students, particularly students at university, and of course, I'll be a homer here and at U of T. You know, you're obviously really bright. You're obviously really accomplished. You wouldn't have gotten into university. You wouldn't have gotten into U of T if you weren't bright. Um, but enjoy yourself. This is the time. This is the time to be curious. It's the time to take chances, to take risks. One of the things that really makes me sad is I understand that students who want to get into U of T medical school, there's like a whole subreddit page on the exact courses that you should take because there's a higher probability that you'll get an A in it. I just think to myself, like, what a you got 4 years where you can explore and be intellectually curious and so on, and you're squandering that opportunity because you have a slightly higher chance of getting a 4.0 GPA or all A's if you take these courses. And I just think, what a terrible waste. But of course, students want to be assured, well, am I going to be okay on the other end? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay.
I never bought into that thing. I always tell my students, or the students I work with, choose the courses that interest you.
Absolutely.
These are the courses you'll get the good grades in.
Yeah.
They might say, oh, this course is easy, this professor is easy. But if you don't like it,
yeah,
you're not going to study and.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
this easy A.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And when I was in undergrad, I did a double major in political science and literature. And in fact, I wrote 2 senior theses. One was on labor markets in China, and the other one was on Henry James. So, I took courses that just really interested me, and some that ended up not interesting me, but I took the chance anyway. I think as well, and this may sound a little abstract, but I really do believe it too, is that, students who graduate from university, no one really cares about your GPA. Like when I've had, when I talk to people who are hiring managers and so on, like, if you got a degree from a university and, if it is a hyper competitive situation, you got a degree from a really good university, and that's good enough, right? They don't really care what your GPA is to the second decimal point or whatever. What they do care about, and this is what I wish students would invest more of their time in, is they want to know, are you an interesting person?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have character? Are you authentic? Are you interesting? Are you boring? Do I want to be with you? Do I want to work with you? Are you going to contribute to my organization, and are you going to contribute positively to the organizational culture? And that doesn't come down to a 3.78 versus a 3.62 versus a 2.91. That comes down to who you are as a person, and where are you going to get that? Where are you going to discover your authenticity, and where are you going to discover your interests and your passion? You're going to do it by living, by having fun, by making mistakes, by having your heart broken, by having your heart swell. I mean, these are things that make us human. And in the end, I'm convinced that that's actually what people, and in the end, that's actually what successful people are. So I would just say to students, I mean, this is not just advice to international students, but advice to all young people, is to just, is to embrace these 4 years. You're not going to be 18 to 23 or 18 to 22 forever. Discover your voice, discover what makes you passionate, discover your authenticity. That's far more important to you as a person, and frankly, to your career in the long run.
Yeah.
What's that?
I don't remember my grades from undergrad. Do you? I don't.
I do, only because the students always wonder, what does it take to do your PhD in the US? And I remember telling one student my GPA, my graduating GPA, and I just saw a wash of disappointment come across his face. Like, oh, I always thought you were a smart guy. It don't seem that bright after all. And I said, well, I managed to be okay. I've written 4 books and so on, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. There you go, guys. Anyone, this is a professor at the U of T telling you this. So if you don't believe me.
Well, we have, so I have this big research project called the Reach Alliance, and it recruits students from across the universities, from across all disciplines. And admittedly, it's really competitive to get into it, right? Because the students are engaged in, really, really in-depth research. It's 18-month research projects. They get publications out of it and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, which is all to say that this is very attractive to high-achieving students. And we'll get 300 applications a year, and we only take about 20. So you've got less than, or 20 or 30. So let's call it 1 in 10. Lisa, every single one of those students is smart. Every single one of those students has achieved a lot, and I always say at U of T, to be a smart student, they're a dime a dozen. So what are we actually looking for? We go through 3 rounds of interviews. What are we looking for? We're looking for character. We're looking for sincerity, authenticity. We're looking for people who have an opinion, even if it's not an opinion that I don't care if I don't agree with it or not. It just, I want to see you have your own voice in all of this. And so we go through 3 rounds of interviews. We have 6 sets of eyes see every single candidate that we interview, because we want to identify not just those who are smart or accomplished. As I say, they're everywhere. We want the ones that are really high character, the ones who are really interesting. And there are lots of, we turn down lots of 4.0 GPA students because you just have to say to them, like, well, what else you got? Is that it? Like 4.0? It's not so hard. Everyone can get a 4.0 if that's all you do. So tell me something more. And if you don't have anything more, sorry, we're not interested. So, I don't know. Hopefully the students that you work with and young people you work with will take that to heart a little bit.
This is what I try all the time.
Yeah.
I like literature and writers. And if you look at a lot of writers that become like Stephen King, Hemingway, whatever, they didn't do well in school. It wasn't for them. They had other ideas. They were creative. A lot of them saw the world. They took inspiration from the world. So,
that's right.
Getting good grades, it teaches you discipline. It teaches you study skills. But there's a lot more out there.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm still encouraging students to do well and to work hard and to strive for excellence. But excellence can be measured in a bunch of different ways. And if you're an art student or a humanities, social science students, you're only in class 15 hours a week, 16 hours a week. What are you doing the rest of your time to make you an interesting person, to enrich your own experience and those and the experience of those around you? There's just so much more to your university career than the curricular. And again, I'm not at all saying to students, hey, go out there and flunk all your classes. I mean, work hard, but recognize that there are other important qualities that other important people are looking for.
Right. And I think this experience also can inform your academics. Like, I think what I thought about China when I lived in Edmonton and what I realized about China when I lived in Beijing, totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a mindset, right? Just being open to it and being curious and not thinking you have all the answers, being modest. I mean, all these sorts of things that I think are really good characteristics and good qualities in people.
So you kind of mentioned your initiative. So I'm not going to bring it up again unless you really want to talk.
No, that's okay. I know. For me, it was just more talking about the kinds of students and the kinds of young people and leaders that we're interested in working with. And to the extent, I mean, that's just one opportunity available at U of T. There are a gazillion of them, but just so students recognize that it doesn't just come down to your GPA. That in fact you can have a strong GPA, but you can be a really strong candidate just because of who you are and the qualities that you bring.
That's really important. So do you want to, I'm going to kind of wrap it. I was just checking if you wanted to talk more about that project.
No, that's fine.
Where would people find out more about it?
There's a website. It's called. Okay, yeah. Why don't you add the link? It's the Reach Alliance at U of T, and do check it out. And there was did a TEDx talk a few years before that kind of set that project up. I'm pretty sure the link is on the website as well. But check it out if anyone's interested.
Okay. And I like books. If you look, I mean, not all my books are behind me, but there's some books behind me.
Yeah.
Bio of Mao. Is there a book? I mean, there's a lot of books, but if there was a book you could recommend to a young person, kind of starting on this journey of going off to university, what would it be?
There's some books I think that would be, so one of my favorite writers is Haruki Murakami.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Japanese novelist, and I don't read Japanese, so I've never read him in the language within which he writes, with which he writes. But from what I understand, the translations are thought to be really, really high quality. Which is all to say that I enjoy his work, part because they're sort of fantastical. They really do have a very he has a tremendously effective way of just bringing you to Japan, to Tokyo in the 1960s, to a smoky jazz bar in the 1960s type thing, And then there's this sort of fantastical elements where it takes you into this.
There's one with like a weird door in a.
Yeah, so you're like a door that takes you to a parallel world and so
Yeah.
on. I mean, it's not science fiction. It's sort of, as I call it, like fantastical. But what I think is most amazing is that he is a brilliant writer. The writing is just incredible. And so, and I've tried to write fiction just because I enjoy writing. And I think that writing is so important and it's such a craft and it's something that I like and it's something that I'm generally pretty good at. But fiction writing is so hard. And the example I always give, and he just does it brilliantly, is, like if you have two characters and they're, when you think about how you become friends with someone, you become friends with someone by just having, major moments in your lives together. But a lot of it is based on the completely and utterly banal, just sort of every day just sitting around doing nothing. So how do you develop a friendship in a fictional piece or a relationship in a fictional piece that takes you through the banal and yet still interests you, that as a reader you continue to read? That's something that Murakami can do. You can read 50 pages and you can say, well, what's happened? You're like, I don't know what's happened, but I'm totally engrossed and I totally want to keep going. So he's, on the fiction side, that's someone I really like. If you were like, I mean, I'm a huge basketball fan. So what's that?
I noticed that on your Instagram.
Yeah. So we have like season tickets to the Raptors, and this is a team that I've loved forever since its very start. But I'm also, I love the culture surrounding basketball as well. I mean, there's from the music to the political activism to popular culture and so on. So I just read at Christmas, my wife got me this book by Doug Smith on the Toronto Raptors. And it's a sort of 25-year history of the Toronto Raptors. Now, if you're not interested in basketball, you might say, well, why would I read this? I think that it actually just captures, especially if you're not from Toronto, it just captures what a sports team would mean to the larger social fabric of a whole city and country. Like if you think back to when the Raptors won the championship in 2019.
Oh yeah.
And you saw the city, and it was what was so amazing. And what I love about basketball games is like every skin color is there, every gender, religion, socioeconomic class. It is such a global sport, and it draws out the kind of globalness of our country and of our city. And so, as a cultural piece, I think that, and anyway, that book is great because it just brings it out. I mean, if you hate Toronto, then you're not gonna like it. I mean, people already accuse people from Toronto as being Toronto centric. I guess the last piece, one that I think would be interesting. Again, this is something I think I would suggest to international students. Is Gord Downie wrote a book, The Secret Path. It was a graphic novel, actually, which I don't normally read. I'm not into that. But on when Gord Downie, who was the lead singer of the Tragically Hip, who of course is which is of course a great Canadian rock band. But Gord Downie, when he died, and he died young. What's that?
Pretty recent.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago. And so for Canada, it was a real moment. But he also wrote this book around essentially the plight of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and specifically around the residential schools. It's a fictional account. Well, actually, it's not a fictional account. It's about a young boy who was real, but it's a graphic novel that depicts his life. And I think so, just as much as on the one hand, the Toronto Raptors is this great symbol of sort of diversity and inclusion and multiculturalism and the sort of postmodern project that is Canada. This is the exact opposite. It's just a stark reminder of, some of the most horrific moments in our history that are with us today. And we continue to unearth evidence of this history. So it's very contemporary. But I think at the same time, it's brutally honest. And if I were to say to someone who was coming to Canada for the first time, read both those books, right? Get a real sense of like what gets us excited and what brings us together and what unites us around something like basketball. But if you really are true to what it means to be Canadian, it also requires you to recognize, to atone for some of the most horrific things that have been done to fellow human beings in our own history, in our own backyard. So I would say those are things that I've recently read and found very, very impactful. So the first one, anything by Haruki Murakami. The second one is the Toronto Raptors, a 25-year history or something like that, by a guy named Doug Smith. He's a journalist. And the third is The Secret Path by Gord Downie. Downey is, Gord Downie, Downie.
We'll put the links to those books as well.
All right, cool. Awesome.
So I actually forgot to ask you about writing, but I'm glad that you briefly brought it up. But we've had such a nice long chat. I don't want to take up all of your time.
Sure.
So I just want to thank you for taking part in this and
no problem. It's my pleasure.
Your wisdom and experience and knowledge and mostly just being a down-to-earth professor. I remember the first time I met you, you weren't intimidating. And
really? Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so
that's good.
I think a lot of students are intimidated and you're just a human.
Well, you know what? I mean, a lot of professors present themselves as intimidating. And so it doesn't at all surprise me that students are intimidated. And that's just too bad, I mean, as professors, we do research, but we teach. They're, I don't even think they're two sides of the same coin. They're the same sides of the same coin. And it's just some professors just don't get it. Some others do.
So I really appreciate you being on here so that students who are intimidated, feel intimidated, have had that experience know. We had another one of my friends on who's also very kind of a welcoming professor that, go talk to your professors.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they don't want to talk to you, then don't talk to them. But at least, find another one. Exactly. All right. Take care, Lisa. It was great seeing you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.